Hey everybody, it's Erik Torenberg, co-founder, partner of Village Global, a network-driven venture firm. And this is Venture Stories, a podcast covering topics relating to tech and business with world-leading experts. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Village Global's Venture Stories. I'm here today joined by two very special guests, Joe Garafalo and Trevor Oelschig. Joe, Trevor, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here. Thanks for having us, Erik.
Thanks, Erik.
So, Joe, you're co-founder and CEO of Mosaic, which is a portfolio company of ours in General Catalyst, and Trevor, you're managing director at General Catalyst. Maybe let's start with introductions. Joe, can you describe to the audience what is Mosaic and how did you come to start it?
For sure. So Mosaic is a strategic finance platform, and we're really building the future of tooling for modern day CFOs. And the idea of Mosaic was really born from our time at Palantir building and leading the finance team. We saw the company go on this really epic ride of hyper growth, expanding from 200 folks to more than 2,000, operating not only in the US across 50 states, but in multiple countries. And during that journey, we implemented tons and tons of the best of breed cloud-based solutions to help us manage and run the business. And there was no good way to actually keep up with all of those toolings and all of that data that was coming from them. So my two co-founders, Brian and Bij, who I was lucky enough to meet at Palantir, we put our heads together and through a lot of long nights built a pretty elegant solution that helped the finance team and the overall company as a whole make sense of the data that was being produced across the globe. And really helped align teams around the most important dynamics of the business and helped Palantir grow and plan for all of the big rounds of funding they received throughout their 17-year journey.
Awesome. Trevor, can you introduce yourself and talk about how you came to discover Mosaic?
Well, so I'm a partner with General Catalyst. We're a global venture capital firm with a history that dates back just over 20 years now, and that's focused on investing in teams that want to build lasting companies that have a positive impact. While I'm a little bit different than Joe in that I haven't been a founder, I have been investing for 15 or so years and have been fortunate enough to invest in companies like Zapier and Shopify and PagerDuty and Loom, Contentful, Aura, Fivetran, and of course the team here at Mosaic. With getting to know the Mosaic team, actually, my partner Pranav had worked with the team while at Palantir. And Pranav and I had met Joe and his founders 2.5 years ago as they were just starting to think about productizing their learnings from running the FP&A function at Palantir. As they were going through the ideation stage and starting to build product, we stayed in touch and saw them make remarkable progress on product in a really short time frame. And a big reason for this is that they really had lived the problem here. Along the way, we had also spent quite a bit of time looking at the emerging landscape of startups that was thinking about the finance function. And we had also seen an important change in the role of the CFO and teams in and around finance. And I can talk a little bit about that. This is the core thesis as to why we're excited here.
Yeah, please. Let's dive into that. Unpack that further.
Sure. Well, at the highest level, the core theme for us here at GC within enterprise is something that we call the stakeholder aligned enterprise. And our observation is that the role, the voice, the power of individual stakeholders within a company is growing. And we're seeing an interconnectedness across the different functions, with each function playing a more strategic role than they had historically. So we're seeing this across the people function, with talent serving as a competitive advantage in an economy that's very much driven by innovation. We're seeing this across product and engineering, with the rise of the developer and the need to be agile. We're seeing this across the customer function, with customer success and the need for every CEO to point everyone across the company towards the customer. And we're seeing this across the finance function as well. And to support this change, a whole new generation of enterprise software companies will need to exist. While the prior generation products were really about helping a person or a team within their function, this next generation is more about incorporating other functions as contributing and as collaborating users. This is the core value proposition for a product like Mosaic, where not just the finance team, but also HR, sales, and marketing all use Mosaic to understand and interact with one another and have a sense of the totality of the business via its metrics. And just as important, to iterate on the whole financial planning process in a way that is very much synchronous, meaning in real time, and very much collaborative, where the experience from a product perspective feels more like Google and Notion than it would Excel or email. And this broad and overarching thesis is the key reason why we got really excited about Mosaic here.
Yeah, and Trevor, you mentioned some really great points there. You mentioned the product organization, you mentioned the HR, the sales function. Finance is really that one team that has the vantage point over all of those different departments, and every single thing that those departments do has a financial impact. And finance needs to be that connective tissue that is aligning all those teams around the common goal that will eventually kind of propel the company towards growth or not. And if CFOs and finance teams only have spreadsheets and PDFs and backwards looking toolkits, that the same ones they had 15, 20 years ago, it gets really, really difficult to align teams around that common mission.
And Trevor, maybe say more about the why now behind the thesis, or maybe how just the broader space has evolved over time in terms of how you looked at it as an investor.
Well, no, historically, software products for the finance function have been really glorified databases, and actually broadly across enterprise software, that's been how software has been built and delivered. Meaning, anybody who's used Salesforce, really, it's a tool that you use to enter information and do queries of information. It is fundamentally not something that's synchronous, and it's not something that's collaborative. And Joe described this new world where all of the stakeholders across a company provide input into, let's say, the financial planning process. And all of the stakeholders have ultimate visibility into the fundamental metrics of the business. And you can only do that if you have a product that's built to incorporate a variety of people across teams, whether it's sales or whether it's marketing or whether it's support or whether it's HR. And, we've all felt that experience of using Google Docs and Google Sheets, where you get a little bit of that magical experience of being able to collaborate. And that's a key part of the value proposition for something like a Mosaic.
For sure. And I would love to add a bit of the why now, based on my perspective, which is the ERP has kind of been unbundled over the last, call it 3 to 5 years, with the rise of these best in breed cloud-based tools. More and more of the data that you need to run the business exists in siloed tool sets that don't speak to one another. So more and more, the role of the CFO actually looks like a skill set in computer science or data engineering to kind of string these different tools together to make sense of what's actually happening across the company. So the rise of all this cloud software, the unbundling of the ERP has made the job of the CFO much more difficult than it has been in the past. And CFOs by nature don't have this technical skill set. Sure, their skill set is technical in the application of GAAP and building complex models and funnels, but it's not technical in building data pipes and writing SQL or Python to join different data sets that need to speak to one another. So in terms of timing, we kind of struck while we saw this problem emerging, and we needed to build something that was easy for CFOs to connect and set up and gives them this technical skill set they otherwise wouldn't have.
And I want to get to sort of transition to one of the main points we want to talk about today is, how do investors and founders have great relationships and what does a great partnership look like? But just to close this loop, we talked about the why now. We talked a little bit about the history. Let's talk about a little bit about the future. If we're having this conversation in 2026, 5 years from now, how is that conversation different in terms of the how the landscape that we're talking about might evolve in the future?
Fast forward 5 years, I see kind of this, I call it a constellation of tools. There's lots of tools in that ecosystem. There's Salesforce on the CRM side. There's Gong. There's Lever for recruiting and Greenhouse for the applicant tracking systems. There's the ERP system that is like, your accounting books and records. There's your HRIS systems like Gusto and Rippling and JustWorks. But at the core of that constellation of tools should be a strategic finance platform that connects and helps you understand all of the financial corners of your business. And within that strategic finance platform, you have your different teams operating and understanding and consuming and collaborating the numbers in a way that is easy to understand. I think when people think about finance and they think about financial modeling and spreadsheets, it's scary to a lot of folks that don't have a background like myself or like Trevor. We want to make that easy and understandable. We should be able to demystify and make these difficult financial concepts actually easy to understand and consume, and educate and arm the business so that finance is used as kind of this offensive tool that it hasn't gotten enough attention for as in the past.
That makes a lot of sense, Joe. Let's switch gears here a little bit and talk about the how investors and founders can have great relationships, great partnership together. Maybe let's start with what are some of the things to avoid or some mistakes that we've seen happen.
Sure. So I can kick us off here. I think one of the things that we see across our customer base, and we have more than 100 customers today, is measuring the wrong things or calculating things that should be straightforward inaccurately. So standard definitions, investors kind of expecting one thing and getting another from their portfolio companies is an easy area to potentially fix. Something as simple as annual recurring revenue. It shouldn't have 20, 30 different definitions across your portfolio companies. We should be able to standardize and make that consistent.
Yeah, Joe, you make a good point. So measuring the wrong things is really about a what I would call a mismatch of expectations, and ultimately the best relationships between a founder and the investors when you have really good alignment here. So much of the time that Joe and I had spent together when we were getting to know each other ahead of the fundraise was about aligning around what you wanted to build, what's the culture here that you ultimately want to foster, and getting a true sense for what the journey that we might undertake here over the course of what will likely be a decade here. And, invariably alignment can shift. It's not impossible, but so much of the time that you spend early on creates a foundation for weathering through it. And mismatching expectations is one example of that, where you're thinking about the goalposts for the business in a way that might be a little bit different. In my case, it might be a little bit different from a founder, and you're starting to think about metrics that are just not yet relevant to the business. So, as an example, very early on, it actually has nothing to do with the metrics here. It's about team. It's about market potential. It's about the ability to recruit great people to come on board with this vision. It's about the pace of product innovation, which is one of the things for me that really jumped off the page with Joe and his fellow founders here. And these things in the early days you really can't quantify, but as the company starts to go from, call it an idea to a project to a business, it starts to see early signs of product market fit. And so you start to pick up on signals and you start to look for similar use cases. You start to look for actual deployments and product usage. And that's when you start to think about what are the right metrics to measure. But if you're pushing for the wrong metrics, let's say early on, you start to see a mismatch of expectations. Ultimately, as as you start to scale even more, you start to see some level of repeatability, particularly around the go-to-market motion. And that's when you start to think about, call it the more classic metrics. But if you're pushing that early on, that's where you start to see a little bit of a mismatch here.
I absolutely agree there, Trevor. And I think it's important too to be honest with your board and with your investors on your plans for things like going to market and whether or not it's a repeatable process just yet. And like you said, if it's a decade-long journey, in year one and year two, you're measuring totally different things than what you'd be measuring in years 4 or 5. Years 4 and 5, maybe you're starting to think through the unit economics and becoming a profitable company. Whereas in year 1, year 2, you're just trying to get market share. You're just trying to get some good logos. And that's actually what matters more so than things like ARR growth or customer acquisition cost.
Maybe the flip side of this question, what's really important for companies to do to be able to develop strong trust with their investors in terms of things to be transparent about and things that we do want our founders to do?
Yeah, I think the first step is really choosing the right partner. You can think of the investor and the board relationship with founders as a marriage. You need to be upfront and honest with what you can accomplish, when you can accomplish it, and really having that foundation for trust early on, so that you are on the same page with, hey, this is a decade-long journey versus, hey, this might be a quick double, which some investors I know are after, versus more of the folks with a long-term horizon.
Yeah, you mentioned long-term horizon, and that is really critical here. And for a great relationship, everyone needs to have the right orientation towards that. The good partners invariably will push founders when things are going well, and when they're not, will try to be supportive. And actually, it's funny because it is the exact opposite of human nature. And it's something I've learned in raising my daughter, is that when things are going well, that's when you want to push and encourage. And when things aren't going so well, you actually want to do the opposite. And you can only do that if you have a shared orientation towards the long term here. And this all comes back to the concept of alignment and setting yourself up for success early on by spending quite a bit of time talking through what are your goals, what do you want to build, and what's the journey going to be like here. Joe, you talked a little bit about trust, and trust is really hard to foster and maintain over years. And the Toby Luca from Shopify, he has an amazing concept that he calls the trust battery, which is really a way to describe the relationship between people. And when you start off with someone, you start with your battery being half full. And as you interact with someone over time, the trust battery goes up or goes down. And when it goes down, you need to rebuild that. And as I think about relationships with the founders who I work with, absolutely right, Joe. Transparency is really, really important here. And whenever there is some kind of drift in alignment, you want to communicate it. From the investor's perspective, and one of the things I've learned over the years is that ideally, you're going to want to try to advise and help where you have the right experience. And if you don't, look for others who can help you. And that's part of what venture investors do by the nature of our network. And that level of credibility of really advising when you have the right experience really matters when it comes to trust. Consistency is super important for obvious reasons here as well. And when it comes to the relationship between a investor and who typically would be sitting on the board of a founder's company and the founder, it's also really important to be thinking about the interpersonal dynamic more as a peer than as a reporting structure. Thinking about the relationship in terms of thought partnership, in terms of collaboration. With actually, Mosaic is a great example. So, Joe and I, we have check-ins every couple of weeks. They tend to be a little bit more formal, but we talk about issues that Joe's thinking about here. And these issues may be issues that are things that he's noodling. They may be about a new product area to go into. They may be issues that are really thorny situations. And we do this every couple of weeks or so, but the best levels of engagement tend to happen when we're doing things over text and it's a quick phone call. And, my favorite part of the relationship with the founder is the moment where you get that Saturday phone call and a founder just wants to talk through something that's really important to them. You may not even have a solution, but you've built that level of trust where they would look to you to make that first call.
That's so important. And I appreciate you guys always being there. I think one more thing to add is just understanding the strengths of the investors that are in your network and that are on your board. I think when we were getting started in the very early days, it was just Beej and I, and Village Global, knowing that we were two non-technical co-founders, matched us up with an incredible technical advisor in Luke Browd. And without understanding that Village was really strong in connecting networks and matching people that they think would be great fits, we wouldn't have our head of technology. So really just understanding the strengths of the people around you and leveraging their networks and their ability to pattern match and talk through hard problems and learn and grow from those experiences.
That's awesome. And shout out Ross Fabini for leading it on the Village perspective. Joe, what should companies expect or ask from their venture firms? Like, what advice do we have in terms of how to get the most bang for the buck, so to speak?
Yeah, I think going back to like the decade-long company journey, you ask for different things at different times. So it might be getting connected to a really strong group of public company CFOs who can help you talk about some of the problems and some of the product roadmap that they would want to see before you're out in the market. It could be finding really good sales hires to lead you to that next chapter from 0 to 5 million, 5 to 20. Understanding those profiles, using networks. Investors know a lot of great people. Boards know a lot of great people, and can be that connector that founders need to just unlock doorways. And I think more than anything, you guys have provided a ton of leverage for founders to do things at a speed which would otherwise, slow us down when it comes to tapping networks or doing things these ourselves.
Trevor, how does the VC founder relationship evolve as a startup matures, and how should investors and founders, which they know about what to expect in that evolution?
Well, one of the unique aspects of investing in a startup is that you're actually not investing in who the founder is today, but rather you're investing in who the person is going to become. And so if you look at a founder when they're just getting their business off the ground, ultimately as they scale and start to build a team and build a big and important company, they're going to grow and mature and learn. And there's just so much that happens along the way. And as a founder goes through this journey, I've seen that the relationship and how we engage with one another actually does evolve. And it ultimately takes on what I would call a higher order, meaning the conversations will shift from being quite tactical to being much more strategic. The networks that we're looked upon to tap into and the introductions that we make and the relationships that we try to help foster become much more senior. We start to think about what might be the second and third act and help to think through what's the right sequencing for the company. And so the level of engagement and the types of conversations are just very different than when you're thinking about it in the most early days, where it's about building that shared alignment, dreaming of what the world can become one day, and thinking about what are the specific tactical problems that you need to solve today to start to move the business forward. And when you start to go on the path of being near and as a public company, just the type of engagement starts to move up a level and it becomes much more strategic.
I have a follow-up question for you on that same note. So Trevor, as the relationship goes from tactical in the early days to more strategic with the founders in the later stage. What are some of the other relationships outside of the founder that you end up developing as an investor, and specifically like towards the finance function?
Well, across more broadly, you start to get to know the entire executive team, and over the best relationships with a founder in a company tend to last over a decade as you go through the journey to being ultimately a public company. So you get to know a lot of people within the company, and across the finance function, the typical relationship that we would build over time. You just think about everything from the head of accounting. You start to think about who's running treasury. You have those types of relationships that you build. FP&A, as that team starts to grow, you start to get to know those folks. And ultimately, if you get closer to being a public company, you start to, there's an audit committee that's formed. There is an audit chair, and you start to get into a level of engagement with this committee and with the audit partners. And so the purview of who you interact with actually broadens, at least from within the finance function.
Absolutely. Is there a specific series stage or revenue size that you see your investments typically hire that internal finance function to help with some of the reporting and the transparency, and I call them earnings calls?
Once you start to see inklings of a repeatable go-to-market motion, where you start to think about things like top of funnel, where you start to think about some level of clarity around sales cycle and the time and effort to get a customer up and running, when you start to have some level of revenue to the business and you don't have several handfuls of customers, that's about the right stage to start to think about your first finance hire.
I would totally agree. As soon as there starts to be some meaningful level of transaction, some customer scale, and more importantly, like when more teams are forming. And the way I think about Mosaic is we have all these great different departments, and all of these different departments are operating like their own startups with their own set of problems. That's when finance can really be that glue that's uniting teams around some of the numbers and the outputs and throughputs that the company is actually capable of.
So we've been talking a lot about how to improve the relationship between a founder and their investors. And we've talked a little bit about the first finance hire here. Joe, I have a question for you, which is based on your experience going through the journey of Palantir and then what you've seen with our customers here with Mosaic, what are some of the things that you think are important to put in place from a tooling perspective to help provide a level of transparency and help the level of communication between the company and their investors?
Yeah, that's a great question, Trevor. I think one of the things to talk about here is around speed. It's important for companies, and it was really important for Palantir to continue to be agile, to understand what was happening in all of these different countries that we were going in to operate. And if the finance team wasn't able to close the books in a reasonable amount of time, we were never going to get the data that we needed to arm our operators on the ground with to make the next decision. So I think the ways that you can improve kind of these relationships with your investors, with your board, is to have really tight and buttoned up processes, and get out numbers and insights that you can actually trust within a reasonable amount of time. I don't think you, Trevor, or you, Erik, want to read kind of a newspaper that's already 45, 90 days old. You guys want to know about the next thing, what the company is doing with the insights that they're getting directly from the customer or directly from the new teams that are forming in new places. So how can you get those insights quickly? I think there's a lot of great software solutions out there that CFOs and finance teams should start to take advantage of, to be able to react and act quicker based on the data and the insights that they're getting from those ground truths.
One of the things I love to see, especially as you start to get into some level of scale, is a quarterly flash that gets shared not just with investors, but across the team, which talks about how'd the quarter go, some quantitative figures like the metrics and what might be the ACV bookings, the new and the expansion, the ARR, a couple of examples of some really fun customers that have been signed on, and then a little bit of qualitative, like how's things going. And it doesn't, Joe, to your point, it doesn't need to be a novel. It's hence the word flash. It's something really that's snackable, that gives people a sense for how things are going, and is communicated more broadly across the organization.
Absolutely. And when you're able to get that flash report and you're able to not only produce it quickly, but digest it quickly, that's when you can push harder on the gas in the places that are going really well, and continue to make more investment in things like sales and marketing, and hire more of the right types of people. But if it takes you 45 days, 90 days to come to that realization, you're already going to be behind the 8 ball. So tons of new software like Mosaic that's out there, making this much easier for companies to understand.
Well, Trevor, Joe, this has been a lovely conversation. Joe, for people who want to learn more about Mosaic, where can you point them? And any plugs?
Yeah.
There?
So our website is mosaic.tech, and feel free to shoot us an email at info@mosaic.tech. Appreciate you having us on here, Erik. Really enjoyed the conversation. Tons of great insight from you and from Trevor.
Awesome. Thanks, Trevor. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks very much.
If you're an early stage entrepreneur, we'd love to hear from you. Check us out at villageglobal.vc.